Film in Minnesota. I'm your host, Alan Tracy.
I'm Rahana Power.
And today we have Jeremy Wanek. Hello,
Hey.
Jeremy.
Hello. How are you guys doing?
Good.
Great.
Jeremy,
How are you?
Yeah,
I'm doing well. Very good. I'm doing good. Happy to be here.
cool. So, Jeremy, you're an editor, right?
Yep, that's correct.
Cool. We'll be getting into all of that here, like what you do and what you've been up to. But first, Rahana has a question.
First, Jeremy, I just want to get to know you. Like, who is Jeremy? So, can you talk a little bit about maybe a special or like unique skill or thing that you do, or just something unique and kind of fun about you?
Sure. Yeah, I have one weird thing where I don't know if this is normal or not, but I can make this weird sound with my tongue that sounds like I'm drinking a glass of water, or that actually like I'm pouring water into a glass. I'll see if it carries through the mic.
Okay.
Yeah.
Here we go. Did that work?
I heard it at first.
At first,
well,
we missed the last part.
The compression. Well, yeah, the live performance is pretty great, but
That's awesome, though.
as far as like, I mean, a little bit more normal kind of thing, like about me, I guess. I'm always trying to, like a lot of people, get in a routine of working out, and sometimes it lasts a week, sometimes it lasts a few months, but it usually doesn't last longer than that. I started a new one last week. Basically just I get up super early to help my kids get on the bus anyways. Getting up at 6 a.m. I have these big logs in my garage that they were just at the house when we moved in. We moved like a year ago, and I thought I'd get rid of them, but I found a cool use for them, which is just carrying them back and forth in the backyard and doing push-ups on them and just pressing them up in the air and just doing all kinds of weird stuff just to work interesting muscles. And then I have a punching bag in my garage, so I do some boxing. I go for runs, and I lift free weights inside. I try to work out 6 days a week, and that's my new thing. It's the second week, and it's going really good so far. So I'm pretty excited about that right now.
That's
Nice.
awesome. Way to be creative with the logs, too.
Yeah, it's a lot more fun than just lifting metal weights. It gets really boring.
For
Right.
sure.
For sure. Yeah. Sounds like a real Flintstones level workout there with the log.
For sure. Yeah,
maybe
totally.
some boulders. You can move some boulders, right?
That would be good. I'm thinking of adding buckets of rocks because we have to get some rocks off the side of the house. So I might add some buckets of rocks to put on the sides of the logs.
There you go.
Do some, yard, what prison yard, like chiseling away at stones, whatever it is, whatever they used to do.
But their inspiration for all this was, I don't know if you've ever heard of David Goggins. He's like a former Navy SEAL. He talks about like doing something every day that sucks, that like helps push your self-esteem. Like if you do something really hard at the beginning of the day, it gives you more confidence to do other things that might be difficult, or where you might be like hesitant to try them or do them because they make you nervous or whatever. And he does, just being a Navy SEAL, the kind of the Hell Week and the crazy training that they go through, he brings a lot of that to it. So I'm not nearly that extreme, but that's kind of where the logs came in, and we'll see where that takes me.
Interesting. That is, I could see that being really inspirational. Yeah.
Yeah, it's cool. Yeah, look up David Goggins sometime. It's he's got very colorful language, and he's a badass.
I like
it's very
it.
tough. Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, Jeremy, we want to dive in. We have a lot to kind of go through. Really interested. Starting out, can you kind of tell us really what you do and sort of how you got there? Because I know you're an editor, but you've done more than editing.
Sure. Yeah. From the beginning, I guess I'll try to go through it sort of quick, summarize the past like 15 years basically. But after high school, I moved to Burbank, California. I went to a school called Video Symphony, which specialized in film editing. It was a great school. It no longer exists. It went under because of there might have been something legal going on. Something happened there. But the school was great, and they trained a lot of the network editors and some of the studio editors, some of the guys in my class working on the TV show 24 at the time. So that was pretty intimidating because I was 19, and they were very far into their career and were already working on awesome stuff. But it was a great experience and it helped push me. And after that training, I moved back to Minnesota. I went to Minnesota School of Business, which also is gone here.
Yep. I know
that's just
about
what
that.
happens. If you got to be careful. If I go to your school, it's probably it's a goner. But yeah, I went there for film, like more of a general, because it wasn't just editing. They had, of course, like storytelling with script writing and camera work, and post, like visual effects and color grading and all this stuff. So sort of like a good foundation on everything instead of just film editing that I got in LA. And then from there, internships at like Fox 9, so a little bit of news work, which really wasn't my thing. Went on to marketing architects, did like commercial work. I worked there for a couple of years, moved to Spark House, which was like narrative cartoon shows for Sunday schools mostly, which was really interesting, doing cartoons. And it was cool because it was more narrative, which was more of my thing. And at the same time, I had started working on indie films, doing visual effects and editing. I got into visual effects pretty early on too, but I'll jump back to that after I keep moving forward. After Spark House, in the past 3 years, basically, I focused on my company that I formed several years ago, but started taking more seriously a few years ago, called Nocturnal Robot. And it's basically a post house, but more of a boutique shop. The people I hire on to help me, if I'm acting as the VFX supervisor, are just people from all over that I've worked with on other projects. The team kind of keeps growing, and we scale up depending on the size of the project. So sometimes it's just me if it's really small. Sometimes it's like maybe up to 8 people. I usually don't like to try to manage too many because I'm also juggling multiple projects or editing another feature at the same time. So it's a lot to juggle. And like a few years, it's before the pandemic. It must have been like 4 years ago when I had the full-time job. I was also working on 7 feature films simultaneously. And it was like, and I don't know, I think I just had 1 or 2 kids at the time with my wife. Now I have 3 kids, but it was just so much that I was just buried, and I had to mix it up and find a better way to do it. And when I lost the full-time job, that helped. And I try to be a little bit more picky with my projects now. And the latest one, catching up to where we're kind of at now, with the Infernal Machine, working on a bigger project like that allowed me to finally focus on what I truly love the most, which is editing. Just to be able to craft the story, work with the performances, and feel like you're really a part of putting the whole thing together. And working with the director for a long time was a lot more enjoyable for me. And doing that allows me to focus on one project finally, instead of like dozens. So that's kind of me running through it as fast as possible.
Yeah.
Well done.
Sounds like an editor. Like, let's put this over here. Let's go through all the timeline. Yeah, right. Know where we're going to put everything. So, my favorite line out of that was, I lost my full-time job, so that helped.
Yeah. Well, and I always wanted to it's hard when you get into some of these jobs in town because it can be hard to find like a full-time gig doing video work.
Right.
For a lot of people, they kind of chase after that, and they're doing freelance gigs and not getting enough work, and it can be difficult.
Yeah.
And I had almost the opposite, where I kept landing these full-time gigs, and it was great because I had a growing family and I wanted to support them. So I felt like it was a good idea to do it, but at the same time, I really wanted to do my own thing, and I had confidence that I could do it, but I was also worried about my wife is a stay-at-home mom too, and like me being the sole provider for the 3 kids, it seemed really risky. But being let go, it did help, because it was like, okay, I just have to do it now. And I had enough connections at the time that the first year was a little scary here and there. And when the pandemic hit, there's definitely a few months where the work slowed down when production, because production obviously stopped, which was okay for a little bit for post, because there was still things in post moving to me. But then once it caught up and post dried up, like a few months after production, there was like a little period of time there where it was tougher. But since then, it's ramped up tremendously. And yeah, I have more work than I can handle, which is awesome. So yeah.
Okay, wow. Geez, where to start? I have so many questions.
Shoot, go for it.
Okay, so you start getting into indie film here in Minnesota, I presume, or maybe you started somewhere else.
Yeah, in Minnesota. Yep.
In Minnesota. Okay. What who was your first film for? Like, are these?
I mean, technically, I guess, trying to think. Yeah, the first feature I ever worked on, I guess, was this movie called Dispatch. And actually, that was a connection I had in California. An assistant editor on that movie recommended me to the director, who had edited a bunch of Arrested Development and a lot of these TV shows. And it was his like directorial debut. And he had me record ADR because Bruce Bonney was in the film, a local actor here in town. And he had gone out. I think they shot that in LA, I'm pretty sure. But he didn't have access to the budget to bring him over. They didn't have the capabilities like we do now quite as easily to do it remotely. So he wanted someone local to record that. I had no knowledge on recording ADR. I didn't know much about it. The sound thing wasn't really my profession, but I was always told to never say you don't know how to do something and just go for it and just learn it, which sometimes is a good idea. And honestly, it's not always the best advice. So I got in trouble a couple times when it came to like designing websites and stuff back in the day when it was HTML. And I'm like, oh yeah, I know this. And they tested me on the interview. I had to basically kind of get out of there because I can't do this, but I didn't want to admit it. So I kind of just left and I said, I don't really feel good. Could I take this home and work on it at home maybe? And he was okay. He said, okay. Then I emailed him saying, hey, sorry, I don't know what I'm doing. I can't do this. Really sorry for wasting your time. And I never took that risk again.
Yeah.
Like that big. But yeah, that was probably the first movie. But then it was random. There was another, and I won't go on and on about every movie here, but there was another movie called The Current, this faith-based film. Troy LaFay, who worked at Minnesota School of Business, who now works at IPR, which is a whole nother thing about something potentially. It sounds like not doing well again. Probably because I was a part of that too a little bit. Because they asked me to teach classes. I didn't get to do that yet, but they just talked to me enough that, there goes IPR. But he had recommended me to edit this movie called The Current. And I met people on that movie that were like assistant directors who then directed their own movies, and that helped usher that in. That's where Ben Enke too, the DP on The Current. I met him on that, and I worked with. He's like DP'd 4 or 5 features that I've edited and countless short films. So Ben and I have a good rapport, and just bounced around all these different connections on these films. It's crazy how it branches out and grows. That's kind of how it happened.
Wow. Okay. A lot to unpack there. Rahana, do you have a follow-up question?
Mine is less of a segue and more just a question that I'm curious about, because I feel like a lot of people view editing as being sort of like almost scary. Like it's very intense, very you have to be very meticulous, and it's very exact, and it's time consuming. And I think that a lot of people are kind of scared to even attempt it, because everything for me, I would burn everything down. Like it would just not work. I would be terrible at it. So like what really draws you to it, and what is your maybe like favorite or couple favorite things about that process as you're doing it?
Cool. Okay. This kind of goes back to what I said I would mention when I went through my whole like history that I would go back to that I forgot to bring up, which was like when I first started editing, it was in high school. It was a class assignment. I was already shooting my own short films, but I would shoot them consecutively, like linearly. Like this happens and this happens and this happens and this happens. I didn't know about editing yet. Like I'm sure most high schoolers know about editing at this point because they have awesome programs in high school nowadays. But my first take on it, I hated it. Like it wasn't fun. It was really technical. I didn't know what I was doing. It felt like it made it worse. I still wanted just to shoot in order. But the more I did it, the more I realized the power with it. And I think for people who are struggling with it, who want to do it, because that's the thing, it's definitely not for everyone, especially I think if you're a super extroverted person, I feel like it could be more difficult if you want to be socializing with lots of people like all day. That's not going to happen unless it's the commercial world. Then you are like interacting with people constantly because they never really let you just do your thing. So there are scenarios for those people, of course, too. But I think the thing that helped me was just doing it over and over and over, getting more and more experience. I was really worried from jumping from my short films to doing professional work, if I would be fast enough, if I would be able to do a good enough job where these producers and art directors who I was working with would be impressed with my work. Like I was afraid of failing everyone. And the only way I got past it was just doing it and going through it and being super nervous. And I think like not being afraid of that failure and just doing it and getting through it, because you're going to get through it one way or another, and maybe you will fail, but you're going to learn from that and you're going to get better. And as long as you stick to it, like you will get better and you will be able to keep doing it and you'll progress and you'll be able to, honestly, I feel like most people can learn how to edit, especially commercial work and corporate work. It gets a little different with narrative features, I feel, and this is transitioning into things I like about editing the most and why I prefer features is the focus on emotion and emotional storytelling. With commercials and corporate work, sometimes they try to get a little bit of that. And of course, if you play a sad song and show sad puppies, it makes you very sad and emotional. But making complex films with complex characters and going to these screenings and watching people cry or feel fear or just being sucked in and feeling like they're a part of this thing and feeling that connection, to me is incredible. And it's just, that's why I like editing, I guess. And that's something that I think is harder for some editors if they do a lot of commercial work. It's hard for them to think about, to dive into like the characters' minds, because and I'll try to make this short, but the way when I'm reading a script, I try to put myself in the character's shoes and sort of reenact it. And sometimes I'll pace around my office and say the lines out loud and try to feel the things that they're going through. And I'm imagining in my head, okay, I'm cutting to this person, now I'm this person. Maybe I'll cut to their reaction while this is happening, and I'll imagine myself feeling these things. And that's sort of what I do as I'm editing the scene. And I know a scene's working when, like, there's scenes in The Infernal Machine that I know we're going to get into probably a little bit later, where, I mean, Guy Pearce is the lead actor in it. He's in almost every scene. So it's the best example I have because he's the best performer I've ever edited. And he's so intense. There's scenes where if he's struggling to breathe or he's breathing really hard because he's experiencing something intense, I was noticing that I was out of breath and I started to feel like crap as I was editing because I was holding my breath and I was feeling the stuff he was feeling. And there's moments in the movie where I would start to tear up or I would feel the emotion or I would show Andy, the director, things, and he would also feel that. And yeah, I love all that stuff. So I don't kind of went into a tangent there, but that's why I love editing.
Yeah. Interesting. Kind of a behind the scenes, well, director editor, if you will, in a way. So,
relationship.
Yeah. So you form your own kind of thoughts in that sense as an editor, like around how you direct your cuts in that sense. So
yeah. And sometimes I agree with the director and sometimes I don't.
Yes.
And I think working with Andy, like I've worked with him for the past 10 years, Andrew Hunt, on various things, a lot of his short films, and he's great to talk with because he loves to argue. I don't like to argue nearly as much as him, but he's fun to argue with because if you have a point that he feels is stronger, he'll always go with it. He doesn't have that ego. And there's definitely other directors who that's different, especially if they wrote the thing that you're editing. which is always true with Andy because he writes everything he directs, and especially if we're working on a project where it's the same writer, producer, director, which I've done, and that can be a challenge.
Yeah. So maybe different visions for certain things, and but if you have options in the editing room, like coverage and such, then you can make certain decisions based on what's available. So
definitely
interesting.
Yep.
Okay, so you mentioned Andrew. I mean, I will drill down a little later here on more technical things because I like to nerd out like that. But
don't we all?
Yeah. Well, okay. Well, I'm trying to think where to even begin because you have so many short films in here that I've seen, both by like Andrew, or it's like you've worked with Jay, Ben.
Yep, Jay Ness and Nathan Block and
Nathan. Yep.
Yeah, I'm not sure who else was shorts, but
pretty much everyone we've had on the podcast.
Julie. Yeah.
You just worked with everyone.
Right.
Yeah, Julie's pilot, I think, or one of her episodes at least. Tuscaloosa you worked on.
Yeah, a lot of that was visual effects as well, or VFX supervisor, that kind of thing. Yeah, Tuscaloosa was an interesting one because that was shot here in town in Minnesota, but it was meant to look like Alabama in the 70s. So that was Splice was the primary like VFX post house, and they needed basically more people to come in to help out, and that's when they brought in me, and I helped bring a small team, which actually I think on that one is only one other guy. What's his name? Don't work with him anymore because he doesn't do this stuff. I wore him out. Dang it, I can't remember his name. Oh, he was so great. I'll think of it and I'll bring it up randomly when we're talking about something else to throw you guys off. But yeah, that movie was cool because it was a huge challenge. I was super nervous. It was, again, one of those times where I felt like I'm going to fail at this. And that was one of the ones I was working on when I was doing 6 other movies with the full-time job. And it was right around Christmas time. It was so busy,
not
so
busy
stressful.
at all.
It was so stressful. Anyways, that was an interesting project. We can move on.
Yeah, miles between us. I'm just trying to list out everything you've done. You've done a lot. Profile of a Killer, that was local here too.
Yeah, that one was camera work, like B Unit. That was back in the day when the Red camera had first started getting really popular and making indie movies look awesome and cinematic. And the DSLR cameras, like the Canon 7D and the 5D, were popular. And I owned a 7D, and that's basically kind of how I got the gig. And I used that as a second unit camera, which seems really weird now because the quality's not. It only shoots 1080. It's not that great, but they were able to match the color profile, and I saw it in the theater, and it matched up pretty well, and I was impressed. And the Black Swan used those Canon 7D DSLRs as well for subway shots, so people wouldn't see that they were filming a scene, so they could get something that felt like intimate without bringing a film camera. I think Darren Aronofsky they went on the subway and actually sort of shot it incognito. Instead of hiring on extras, it sounded like, but steal some shots.
Yeah. American Beast.
That was an early one. That was a connection from The Current. Taylor worked on The Current, and that's how we met. Taylor's awesome. Taylor and Livingston co-directed that. That was a fun one.
Wow. Okay, just a little trip down memory lane here. That one got a DVD release too, so that was nice.
Yeah. That doesn't always happen with some of the smaller movies.
Yeah, right.
So out of all these, I mean, everything that you've worked on, your resume is very vast. Are there any that really stand out that that aren't necessarily favorites of yours, but because even if there are, we don't want to call that out, but or make you call it out, but like any that maybe had a larger impact for you or for your career that stand out in your mind?
Man. I mean, the first, it's cool working on the indie movies. like the true independent, smaller films that are made for like shoestring budgets of $100,000 or less. I mean, one of them that I worked on, Into the Void, was like a $3,000 budget, which I think was just for like the catering. I did it for free at the time. It was one of my first things. I don't do that anymore, so don't expect me to edit for free. But Charles Hubble was in that, and Sasha Andreev, and so many local actors. And it took, I think it's sort of still coming out. I think it's going to have like an official release in a year or so. It just got picked up for distribution like 15 years after we edited that thing.
Wow.
But that was like the first one, and it was exciting to just be doing it. And then as we progressed, the budgets got slightly like the trajectory of like the movies I've worked on. The budgets have really, they went from like 3,000 to like 20,000 to 50,000 to 100,000, like is very gradual to get to some of the bigger movies. And I guess the first like bigger one budget wise was Woodlawn, this faith-based film. I think that also takes place in the 70s, kind of like Tuscaloosa, a football movie. The Irwin brothers directed that. I just did a handful of visual effects, but what was cool about that is it was released by Universal to theaters, and it was the first time I saw my work like on a wide release in theaters, and going to the theater and just waiting for my shots that I worked on to come up and seeing them on the big screen.
Yeah,
was super cool. And to contrast that, I worked on another one of their movies later called I Still Believe, and that one had a huge release, like 4,000 theaters nationwide, and it was in IMAX. They were expecting it was through Lionsgate. They were expecting a really big release, and that was, it opened the week before the lockdown in 2020. So it was the worst possible time to release it. And I wanted to see the theater. I wanted to see it in IMAX. This was the first movie I worked on that was being released in IMAX. And I went to the theater. There was almost no one there. It was at the AMC in the mall, and I think at Southdale. And there was like these two guys going up the escalator. I remember one of them touched like the railing on the side as they're going up, and the guy was like, "Dude, what are you doing? Don't touch that! Like, you don't know you could get COVID." And we didn't know anything at that time, and so everyone was freaked out. And I was the only person in the theater watching the movie I worked on in IMAX in this huge, huge theater. And the movie is really emotional about this woman who gets, it's not really a spoiler. It's based on a true story, but she gets cancer, and it's about her husband, who's this sort of pretty famous, Jeremy famous Christian singer, and how he deals with this struggle he has and all this with her. And so it's a very emotional movie. So I was crying in the theater all by myself. And I felt weird too, because I didn't know if I should like be touching my face, because I touched the seats. I didn't want to get COVID. And it was like the weird, scary mix of emotions. And the last time I was in the theater, so like for 2 years then, like until theaters started opening up and all that.
I saw that after, it must have been during the pandemic or something, because it was like on demand, and we've rented that and watched it. Very, very good. You did an excellent job.
Nice. And that one I just did visual effects on. It wasn't an edit or anything like that cool, but it was still awesome, and they're big shots, and that was cool.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Okay. I think now's a good time for me to really drill down into the technical.
Cool.
Okay, so Mac or PC?
It's kind of weird, but I've always been a Mac guy. I did buy a PC though, like 3 years ago. With visual effects, you kind of need more power than a Mac can deliver. And I have a 24 core processor in my PC, and for a lot cheaper than you could get on a Mac. Even though things are changing now with the Macs, with the Mac Studio, I think it's called, which I would like to get that. That would be pretty nice. But yeah, so I'll say I'm more of a Mac guy, but I have both. I have a Mac and a PC. Okay.
Well, let's see here. So I have to ask both questions. Okay. Okay, so let's say you're working on a Z-Fest short film. What type of editing software do you choose, depending on camera, of course, and codecs, but what do you normally go to?
Premiere Pro That's
Okay.
I've edited with everything, but yeah, I prefer Premiere Pro for everything basically now.
There you go. You should be at the next Adobe Max conference or something. Um,
That would be great.
yeah, next month or so, or well, technically this month when the episode comes out, but yeah, this is your pitch for them.
Yeah, if you can help me get there, that would be great.
Yeah, we'll do that.
Thank you.
uh, thank you, Adobe, for sponsoring. No. Yeah, so then okay, you go Adobe, so that means After Effects, that means Photoshop, that means all the visual effects, of course.
Yeah, a lot of I use After Effects a lot for visual effects. I used to use a little bit of Nuke, but Nuke is that's by the Foundry. That's definitely more of the industry standard for compositing, but it's really expensive. After Effects is so much cheaper, and if you have Creative Cloud, it's right there, and
yeah,
it works just as well for me.
Yeah, get those Black Friday deals. That's what I say. But
For sure, yeah, great deals.
What do you think about, like, I don't know, there's a lot of like raw codecs that aren't red, of course, but are more proprietary, much like Apple's. I'm learning about Apple's ProRes RAW, which is kind of annoying for me because I prefer DaVinci, but yeah, you have to go Final Cut with that. So what do you think about things like that? Are you finding workarounds? What's your, when you run into
whatever? For me, because there's so many different codecs now. Like I usually just with Premiere, I proxy everything at this point and dumb everything down to 1080. Sometimes even 1280, but 1080 is fine as like ProRes proxy files. And and you can easily toggle the button back and forth to see the full quality shot if you want, like the raw, if you set it up that way. But yeah, there's no reason to edit with footage that's super high quality. Like the industry is never really, like the major studio movies have always edited with these lower, these compressed files, just because it's just lightweight and fast, and you don't have to worry about the slowdown. So
right, but then you have to proxy, and that takes forever. So I mean,
not if you have a 24 core processor PC.
You got me there. You got me there.
But it does take time. But yeah, if you have an assistant editor on the project, that helps because they can do that kind of stuff. So you don't have to worry about it.
So, okay, you get in. Okay, wait, I'm not done nerding. I just got. Okay. I want to talk about like HDR real quick, about things like that. How are you finding that workflow? How are you liking the color and different monitors and finding the right ways to actually view it?
As far as editing goes, it's not a problem because I don't worry about it. It's more on the color side. But as a VFX artist, the deliverables sometimes are a pain because you have to break the shots apart just so they have more. I think the last HDR project I worked on was this music video for Evanescence. That was shot in town by Eric Howell, was the director. Bo shot that, and Bo Hackle, I think is his last name. That music video turned out great. It was obviously that was a cool project, and they did that in HDR, and I was the VFX supervisor, and we had to break things apart for the colorist, so we had more longitude basically then to keep those bright parts bright and just get the max out of the color and all that. And for me, then I don't have a lot of working knowledge with it because it's still relatively new. And like if I'm editing a project like the Infernal Machine, for instance, that's I think they're going to finish that in HDR. I'm not 100% sure. They finished in 4K. And I know the colorist, we set it up for HDR, so I don't know why they wouldn't have delivered it to Paramount that way. I'm assuming they did. But I had the entire editing process on that was basically offline footage. So I actually never even touched the high quality footage on that project, which is interesting. So I didn't have to worry about the HDR aspect at all. And a different company did the visual effects, which is great. So I don't have to think about it on that one. It's like a vacation. So, from that stuff.
Jeez. Visual effects wise, you said Nuke.
After Effects is the one I primarily use. I would use Nuke if it was cheaper, but because I think it's just a little bit more of the industry standard, and the tools are slightly better, but it's also all node based, which with After Effects, you're used to layers, kind of like Photoshop, and I'm a little bit more used to that. So the node thing, I'm just slower at, so I don't prefer that.
Yeah, DaVinci is node based also, and that still has some like pain points where it's like if you fill it up too much, then it's like got to make this bigger or something. Yeah. Anyways,
yeah, it's definitely a learning curve for sure.
Okay, so you're in the editing bay. Where do you start? Like, do you lay it out? Do you go with whatever comes in first, or how do you edit like something, especially if you have to on a timeline?
It depends on the project, but usually there's a script. So at the beginning of the day, I'll read the script. I mean, if it's a feature, I'll just read like that scene that I'm about to cut again and sort of imagine it in my head. And sometimes I'll do that if I haven't looked at the footage yet. I'll imagine what it's going to be cut like with the shots, how I would shoot it basically, which is kind of interesting because then when I look at the footage, a lot of the times they did not cover it the way I imagined it in my head, and the environment maybe was completely different, or they had to change locations. So it's not even like the same world. And then, from there, I'll do string outs basically. And with the dialogue to get the best dialogue, because a lot of times with performance, I think people sometimes think about the picture and the audio as one cohesive thing, and they're looking at just this one take, or say take two, that was the best performance. But that's not really how I look at it. It's more so visually, maybe in take two, it looks great. But the audio in take one, I actually like the sound of that better. So we do a lot of Frankensteining stuff, and it's easy to see the difference in the takes when you lay it out, like basically line by line. So say in take one, there's 3 sentences. You'd break up that take by the first sentence, and say there's 3 takes of that. So it'd be that first sentence 3 times in a row, and the second sentence 3 times in a row, and so on. And when you do that, and sometimes you even get down to the word if you really need to, and especially if the performer isn't a great actor, that's sometimes how you can mold a better performance, by finding all these words that they said better and putting them together. And sometimes you make a mess, and sometimes it sounds a lot better, and you really craft a unique performance. And it's crazy then how you can sync that up to one visual, and it looks like just one cohesive thing, that it was shot that way. And that's how you can better someone's performance. Sort of, it takes a lot longer. So like you said, if you don't have a lot of time, you're not doing that. But if you have the time, that's the best approach. And keeping everything organized is super helpful, because if nothing is named, everything is a mess. You don't know where to find the shots. That's only going to slow you down. You're not going to be able to think creatively.
Right.
And then you just pass after pass after pass. Like editing is all about re-editing. So the first pass on a scene usually isn't amazing. And it's kind of nice to rough it in, move on to another scene, rough that in. And then when you go back to that first scene, you really see the pitfalls and how you can make it better. Especially after you have an assembly of the whole movie. If it's a feature, it's a mess usually, because you're looking at it scene by scene, and a lot of times you're editing in completely different order. Right. So when you watch that first assembly, most directors will say this, that it's awful and it makes them sick, and they don't know if they really have a good movie. And you just have to have the confidence to know that it's going to be fine. And it gets a lot easier the more you do it, because, as you're watching, you can basically be like, okay, we could do this, we could do this, we can move this around here. And basically that's my process. Long story short.
Nice.
So I'm going to stay away from the technical questions now, but can you tell us a little bit about your experience? You mentioned that the Infernal Machine is really probably the biggest, or maybe not the biggest, but at least Guy Pearce. Biggest
from an editing
you've
standpoint,
had to edit. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience with that?
Yeah, for sure. It's with all the different budget ranges I've worked with, and even it's surprising too, there's actors who are known actors, and I won't name any names, but there's certain actors who they've been in huge movies, huge movies, and lots of them, and they're very well known. And as they get, maybe it's just as they get to a certain age, their performance just lacks and is it's not all there, and you really have to work around it in the edit. And I think people would be surprised, the audience would be surprised to know how much manipulation is involved. That did not happen on the Infernal Machine with Guy Pearce or Alex Pettifer, Alice Eve, Jeremy Davies. It's very different. And with Guy Pearce specifically, it took me, because I was so used to working with performances a lot of the time, that not that they were bad, because even on the low budget movies, there's always good actors. Especially Andy's other movie he directed that I cut for him with Anna Strands and Dariush Moslemi and Miles Between Us. They're both very natural and gifted, and Anna's a great actress, and Dariush wasn't even an actor, and
Wow.
the guy who plays her father, and it's crazy how natural his instincts are.
Huh.
But anyways, they were fun to edit. But so with Guy, you don't have to cut around anything. You can hold on him much, much longer. And Andy shot plenty of oneers in the movie too, where we're on Guy for a long time, and he like commands the scene, and he's just a badass, and he doesn't screw up a line. It was like 2 or 3 takes maybe where we had to stop because someone was in his eye line and it might have been distracting him. Other than something like a technical thing like that, he really doesn't make mistakes, which is weird. And also his sense of continuity is ridiculous. He knows, like, through his, he'll say there's 3 takes. He'll move the same way in each take so that when you're cutting to different angles, you can cut almost whenever you want and there'll never be a continuity issue. But he also gives a unique performance in each of those 3 takes. Like, he makes different choices, but they're not necessarily in the blocking or his movement. So, which sounds like somewhat of a simple thing, but working with actors who have less experience, they don't have that skill down, and you get stuck where it's like, okay, I really want to cut to the close-up here, but I can't because they decided to do this close-up with their hands on their head the whole time, but they never did that in the wide shot or something.
Oh, no.
And so you're stuck with having to cut at a very specific time just because the continuity is so awful. And I don't like to focus on continuity. I cut for emotion, because the audience cares way more about that than the continuity. But sometimes the continuity is so bad you just have to like go with it. So anyways, back to Guy, you don't have to worry about anything. He delivers, and like, it's a lot easier to cut someone like that because it's a lot less work and you do a lot less cutting. So that was my experience with cutting Guy.
Yeah, that's got to be amazing. Like, you tell us more there. Like, what was it like? Yes, giving Andy the first cut of Infernal.
So yeah, they shot in Portugal for 28 or 29 days. During that time, I was back home in the States at my house. I was in my office that I'm at right now, my edit suite in St. Paul, for the first 2 weeks with my assistant. But then I got COVID the second week. So I went home and I edited from home, and I didn't take a day off. It was awful.
Wow.
But I worked through it because it was a big opportunity and I didn't want to screw it up. And so the process was they would send me the DIT, the digital intermediate technician, would send me dailies, basically the night, the day they would shoot. So say day 1, day 2, I would get that footage, and so on and so forth. And so I was always a day behind them. And that was always the goal, was I'd cut those scenes together and export them out, send them to a producer who I didn't realize was sending them to Paramount. And Guy even was getting the scenes, which Andy didn't know about till he saw him on set. And I was like, oh, what are you watching there, Guy? And are those the dailies? And he's like, oh, no, these are the scenes. And Andy was like, what? You're watching the edited scenes? And he's like, yeah, it's great. And
wow.
He's like, oh, good. That's good that you're liking it. And we really didn't we weren't assuming the studio was already looking at everything. And Guy, because Andy wasn't looking, he didn't want to watch any dailies during principal photography just because he wanted to focus on the directing. And he didn't want to see how I edited it and get like a bunch of ideas of how he might want to tweak things and mess with his head. And so those first 4 weeks, I was editing by myself. And then the last 16 weeks, when he came back to the States, I had the full assembly together. We watched it together. We both knew there was a good movie in there. There were scenes that were working pretty well off the bat, but I mean, with Andy, we always like tear it to shreds, and even in short films, like if you were to read the script versus the movie, quite a bit changes, just because he finds new ways to make it better, and it's never done until like they basically said this is the deadline, we have to finish the locked edit here, and we worked up till like the last day was like a 14 or 16-hour day finishing the end of the movie, and then sent it off to Paramount, and that was the locked edit. So yeah, it got intense at the end which I knew would happen because it was very complex, and without giving anything away to the movie, just as it goes along, the scenes get more and more complicated to edit. It's a very technical movie, being a psychological thriller with all the twists and turns, and just the way some of the scenes work, and trying to do things that we hadn't really seen before in a movie is a challenge. And Andy didn't really want to repeat himself twice with any specific scene. Like, we wanted to do something different in every scene, even if something they're doing is similar from scene to scene. We wanted to cover it a different way. We wanted to cut it differently. And that made it challenging, but also fun and a better movie.
Yeah, so like they were filming and you were editing at the same time, it sounds like.
Yep.
How long was your editing time for this? Like, what did they give you for a timeline, basically?
So it was 20 weeks from like the 4 weeks in Portugal when they shot, and then the 16 weeks after. So they started shooting, got it written down here. Like, it was around the end of July, like July 19th in 2021. And then I think we sent the locked picture December 4th. So those are like the exact dates from when they started shooting to locked edit. And the locked edit, it had some rough sound design. Some of the score was, well, I don't know if any of the score was finished. We just had some rough score sort of done, but most of the post work was done after picture lock. It just sort of worked out that way. And we had pickups too, about 10 or 12 days of pickups that we shot in Minnesota, which is kind of interesting because the movie takes place in Southern California. They shot in Portugal because it was cheaper, of course. And doubling things in Minnesota with the pickups, demanded, like, the DP to Sarah Dean. She's from the UK. So she was working with Ben Enke, who was technically shooting those shots in Minnesota, and they would do a Zoom call. And the producer Lionel too, who's also in the UK, he would also be on the call, and they would, that's how she would basically sort of direct the photography through Zoom with Ben as he gets the shots set up and everything to try to match the lighting perfectly.
Wow.
And for these pickup shots that were usually like close-ups of hands or feet, and little like action moments and insert shots that they didn't have time to get in Portugal. And so we didn't need the actual actors for it, which was good because we couldn't have afforded that. But that also helped. That also made the editing difficult because some of those pickup shots we got, I mean, it was like close to the end of October, and some of them we weren't working in until like the last month of editing for the first time. And some of them were major scenes in the movie, which I can't talk about, but they were. Is very complicated towards the end with where it was, I don't know. I can't get into it. If you watch the movie, you'll see some.
You have to watch the movie.
Yeah.
Then ask your questions away. I think also, like, okay, so you mainly worked on the picture lock, so picture editing, no audio really, no mixing.
Not too much. Not definitely not mixing. Yeah, the sound. I mean, I would put in temp sound effects. That's usually what I do just to get the idea across. Sometimes they might use the sounds, but most of the time it's meant to be temp. We didn't really do a lot of temp score. He doesn't like temp score because he feels like it cheats the scene. Because I mean, if you play a really good score over a scene, it just makes it feel good.
Yeah.
I mean, along with that too, he has this. If we can't quite figure out a scene, or something feels rhythmically off, but we're not quite sure what, or the opposite, where we feel like it's working, but we just want to test it. he has this thing. I don't know if he talked about it in his interview, but the Bad Company test. Did he talk about that?
Mm-mm.
So the Bad Company test is that song "Bad Company" by Bad Company. We play that song. We turn the audio off from the scene or down low, play the scene back with that song. And that song has so many flourishes and like a nice beat to it that you can kind of feel when things are working or when things aren't working. There's obviously other songs you could do, but Andy swears by Bad Company.
Interesting.
And it helped us in some scenes. There was definitely some scenes we play it and we're like, it's not working, but we knew the scene worked. So like, okay, well, yeah, that's not the right song for that, obviously, but it definitely it was an interesting way just to reframe your mind if you've seen the scene too many times and just trying to see it differently.
Okay.
That's always a challenge too. And he would bring in people on the weekends to come in and sort of screen scenes or the whole movie up to a certain point just to get their feedback on how they were feeling about it. And he would bring in, since we were at IPR doing the edit, he would bring in students sometimes too, just to watch things and give their critique, which is nerve-wracking at first to bring in so many people as I'm trying to figure out the scene and I wasn't even ready sometimes to show.
It's not ready yet.
But just having them in the room, even if they didn't say anything, if there's something I feel like, crap, that part, then I know I need to fix that part. If I feel, and it's sometimes you don't even notice that till you have someone in the room and you're like, crap, I know that part doesn't really work yet. So being able to do that, being bold enough to let people criticize your work almost every day, even though it can be painful, is super helpful and it will make a better product.
It's I understand a little bit about feature making because I spent 2 years editing my own film too, and it was just like I've seen you see it like 100 times at least before the film's even out. So so it gets every beat,
numbing,
everything,
brain numbing.
Is the 20-week process that you went through editing this, is that a normal time frame, or is that maybe expedited or extended?
It depends on the size of the movie. I think a lot of times they'll edit a movie in like 12 to 16 weeks. My camera just shut off again, but we'll see if it.
We can see.
It's fine. I don't need to see myself. But I mean, like the Asylum that does a lot of the Sci-Fi Channel movies, their turnaround is insanely fast. Like within like a month, they'll do like an entire movie. But then you have movies like Top Gun, where that one was a little messed up because of the pandemic. It's hard to know how much time they actually spent, but I know they shot it for at least a year, and I think the editing process was at least a year, but maybe even 2 years. So, and that movie is huge and super complicated. And so it ranges, but I feel like like the 16 to 20 weeks thing is pretty normal for just straight up editing. And then the whole post process, I'm not sure, because it kind of depends again how many visual effects and that kind of thing, but generally it's like within a year's time from when you start shooting to it's being released kind of thing, something like that. But again, the budget too, a lot of the indie movies I worked on, it was different, where it takes longer because the budget's so low, people can't work on it full time. And then it takes longer. Or you're Terrence Malick and it takes you 10 years to make a movie. So
or James Cameron.
Or James Cameron, exactly.
Killed me.
What else?
Well, what's next for you? What's on the horizon? What can we get it hyped up about next?
I'm working on a movie called Devil's Night, which is a medieval horror action thing with Kevin Sorbo and Eric Roberts, Daniel Baldwin, just maybe the least known Baldwin, but he's still one of the Baldwin brothers, and a couple other people. That's sort of an epic, lower budget but bigger budget, lower budget. And I worked with that producing team on this movie called Death Count, which is another horror movie that's more in the torture porn, super gory category. So that's definitely not for everyone, the Death Count movie. This is less of that, more story, more character. But But that's what I'm editing right now. And then there's also random things that come up. I just finished doing visual effects in this movie, The Storied Life of A.J. Fickery. I think that's what it's called. I'll try to very briefly. It's based on a New York Times best-selling novel. It's got David Arquette, Christina Hendricks from Mad Men, and the main guys from The Big Bang Theory. Can't remember how to say his name. And various other people. He's like that Indian guy. I didn't want to say it like that.
Raj.
Yes,
Raj from
I don't watch the show, so I didn't want to do it like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's the main guy in the movie, and from what I can tell, because I haven't seen the movie, some of the times when you do these visual effects, they don't show me the movie, so I don't know. But it looks really good. The trailer was just released. It's a rom-com, which isn't my thing, but it looks pretty funny, and you can watch the trailer for that now. But yeah, the biggest thing I guess I have coming up again is The Infernal Machine coming out September 23rd. In select theaters, and it'll be on digital at the same time, and then go on from there. But Andy's next movie, he's getting going. He has lots and lots of scripts ready to go, and one in particular, and can't talk much about that, but it's a big movie and really, really good. Very excited about that one. Everyone who reads the script is pretty blown away, kind of like they were with The Infernal Machine. But yeah, this one is, it's on like another level as far as budget and what's needed. And that one, the process will take a little bit longer because there's more action and it's a lot to it.
Nice.
Fun. So you just said something and so it made a question pop into my head. Is there a genre, you were mentioning the horror and it's not everybody's cup of tea. I am a baby when it comes to scary movies. So like if I had to edit that, I'd be like, this is my nightmare having to rewatch this a billion times. Is there any genre that you maybe don't hate editing, but you're like, it's not my thing having to watch scenes from this genre a billion times? Like maybe it's the rom-com. You're like, I'm over it or something like that.
I don't know if it'd be a particular genre. It might just be a particular type of content. Like as far as features go, as long as the acting is good and the emotion is there, I'm happy editing anything. Because I can find, as long as I can connect to the characters, it's fun editing something like Miles Between Us. That's a faith-based drama, that something like that compared to Death Count. That's a torture porn thing. That's on a completely different level. If I can connect with the characters somehow, it's just as fun to edit either or. And it's kind of fun to jump between the two. I think if I just did one genre, it would get boring. It's kind of nice to jump to different things. But I don't really have corporate work definitely isn't as exciting, but I can do the same thing. I find a way to make it fun in my head. So
you have to. I mean, you're a creative, so you have to be creative about how you go about doing things. So
for sure.
Exactly. Yep.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, how can people support you or like maybe get a hold of you if they want to work with you? Like, do you have website, contact information, social media?
Yeah. You can search for my name, Jeremy Wanek, which is Wanek. Online, you'll find me. I have a website too, nocturnalrobot.com. You can also search for jeremywanek.com. It'll go to the same website. I have contact info on there and all my links to Instagram and Twitter, which I don't really use Twitter, but yeah, you can find me if you search for me. So
very nice. All right, Jeremy, this is the big one. What do you want people to remember most about you?
That's a good question. I guess, being a parent, because I guess for me, it would be more so, it might not be everyone, how I want everyone to remember me or look back at me on. It'd be more so how I want my kids or my wife to see me, which is just that I was able to balance my career and family life well enough that I felt successful at my career, but at the same time, I felt like I succeeded in parenting my kids and being a good husband to my wife, because that's really tough. Anyone who's juggling family and career, it's a huge challenge, and I've sucked at it so much early on. I learned so many things from the mistakes I made that I think that would probably be the biggest thing is, for my kids or my wife to look back and think I did a good job with, being a parent or a husband. And then the career stuff too, that I did good with that. That's more for me, but, that's kind of the thing. And I guess maybe even mentoring some people with editing would be cool. Some up and comers, which I've gotten to do, at some of the places I've worked at, less independently now. It's a little bit harder to mentor people, and with COVID, it delayed all that, but that stuff was cool too. Yeah.
Well, that just made my heart really happy. That was a great answer. So, Jeremy, thank you so much for taking the time today and sitting down with us. Like you mentioned, you're at work, so you just took time away from probably an exciting project to chat with us. We really appreciate your time.
Happy to do it.
Yeah. And until next time, this has been Film in Minnesota.